3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Nittany No Huddle Podcast.
From Philadelphia to Los Angeles
And everywhere in between.
filmed at the Nittany No Huddle studio.
It's Jordo, Zach, and Coach Devin covering all things Penn State football all the time.
This is from 45 and it's blocked. Lions scoop it up. Brad Haley will score.
And here we go.
All right, welcome back, Nittany No Huddle Nation, to another podcast episode here today. Again, we're without Jordan, but we got myself and Zach here. We're going to talk about all things Penn State football, specifically previewing their very dangerous game this weekend against just an absolute powerhouse FCS school. So, Zach, how you doing?
Doing well. How about you?
Doing great. Ready to talk some football. So let's first start by any last closing thoughts on West Virginia. I know you had a couple comments right before we came on the air. What are your thoughts on it? How's it sitting with you almost a week later? Are we going to the national championship? What are you thinking?
I still, with the benefit of a couple days hindsight, I still think it's a really nice win. I think West Virginia did some nice things. I think the one thing I'll say, I feel like as I went back and watched the game over, I feel like maybe some of the folks in the Penn State community are getting a little bit, they're reading a little bit too much into what was just moderate run game success that West Virginia had. In reality, I think we talked about this immediately after the game. It seemed like a lot more of like gap integrity issues, and especially early, I feel like they were so amped up and we were doing a lot of exotic stunts, and it didn't look to me like we were just getting bullied or pushed around. I do think, like, if you're West Virginia and you look back, do you say, CJ Donaldson, again, 18 for 81, that's not like he was destroying us, but do you try to get him 25 carries, or, did you lean on the run game a little bit more? I don't know. It seemed like the type of game where Penn State was always firmly in control, and there probably wasn't a whole lot strategically. Fan bases that lose are always going to come out and say, the coach called a horrible game, and I think that 4th and 2 we talked about, that was a weird time to dial that one up. But if you're West Virginia going into the game, it was like, let's run the ball, let's have the QB run and keep that threat alive. Let's not turn the ball over. Let's not give up big chunk plays to Penn State, and let's keep it close. And you pretty much did all of that. I mean, you gave up the big chunk play to Lambert Smith early, which kind of put you behind the 8 ball. But for the most part, it's kind of like you did what you wanted. You kind of did what you said you needed to do coming into the game, and it just wasn't enough. And yet somehow the takeaway from that is, like, Neil Brown's the worst coach in the history of the world, and let's fire him. And, again, maybe I think West Virginia is a proud program, and they should expect to go to bowl games and have winning seasons. But I don't know. Some of the reaction I saw, I think, from the West Virginia folks was, and I don't want to play it off as like sort of a slap in the face to Penn State, but it's like, it's the number 7 team in the country at home in a night game. Maybe cut your coach and cut your team some slack. I think they did some good things.
Yeah, I would totally agree with all of that. I think West Virginia is not as far off as maybe they have been the last few years. Am I going to say that Neil Brown is the coach for them? I don't know. I don't follow West Virginia football enough to know. We always say it on here when we were harsh on Franklin, like, who are you going to go get that's better? I don't know. I mean, I think they did a lot of really good things. I think they're going to be competitive at the bottom of the Big 12. Are they going to go out and win that? No, absolutely not. They're going to fight to get 6-6, maybe 7 wins. But if I'm them, I'm obviously never happy when you lose, and when you lose by 30 points, that's never good. But I wouldn't feel too upset.
Big 12, man. It's like we always say, it's the Big 12. And you look around that league after week 1, Baylor loses to Texas State. BYU, they had like a 10-0 win over Sam Houston or somebody. I mean, there's some other teams in the league that had a worse week 1 than West Virginia. But anyway, that was something that was sitting with me. But we're not a West Virginia blog, so I shouldn't maybe spend so much time on that. But again, the run defense, and with a bit of hindsight, I think I'm not quite as concerned as I was the night of the game. It seems like there's some correctable things. I didn't feel like we were getting blown off the ball, and we didn't give up any big chunk plays in the run game. That's the other part of it. Is Donaldson was had a good night and he was getting 4 or 5 yards, but we also were containing him for the most part.
Yeah, and like you said, we're not really West Virginia podcast. So just to hit one quick thing about Penn State, got into it a little bit with a commenter about Drew Aller's performance. I want to be clear. Drew Aller played really, really well, but I'm also not going to say he played perfect because he didn't. And he showed signs of things that I would be worried about. Did he play great? Yes. Did he come over and the O-line coach said he was diagnosing blitzes and helping them pick up the right pack or the right blitzing backers and stuff? Yeah, awesome. Really good. I still think that he needs to improve. And it's his first career start. So he wasn't supposed to play a perfect game. I mean, you look at that first touchdown. That was 2 centimeters away from being intercepted. He had 2 other passes that were dropped by West Virginia. It's a totally different narrative if either one or all 3 of them are intercepted. So just to be clear, I think Drew Aller played great, but I think you're wrong if you say, oh, he was elite. No, he wasn't. He can definitely improve. And he will improve, I think. This is a great week for him to go out, hopefully play a quarter and a half and just play really, really well, and then sit and rest and wait for the real games a couple weeks from now. So that commenter has unsubscribed allegedly. We picked up like 15 subscribers this week. We went over 300. I'm pretty content with where we're at. So
we'll gladly take him back, if he wants to come back. But I think not that we're, we don't proclaim to be the world's greatest football experts, but I think we are a Penn State podcast that wants to look critically at Penn State and talk about Penn State football and Penn State players in a critical but fair fashion. And sometimes that means there's a player that has a great game and you still got to point out some things that maybe weren't great or plays that weren't great. The alternative is sometimes you have guys that have a bad game but do some good things, and you got to tell the whole story is basically where I'm at. And I think you pretty much nailed it right there. For me, Aller, it's not even so much the stats or like the big plays. For me, it was like the whole operation of the offense and, just no like false starts and dumb procedural stuff. He just seemed like he was in command. He knew where the ball was going at all times. He had us in the right play. All of that stuff for me, as you mentioned, with being his first start. I mean, I love the arm talent and what we saw, but for me, seeing the other stuff, I think as far as his progression as a quarterback, because being a quarterback is a lot more than just having the arm talent. So I think we saw kind of everything, and that was what's most that's what gives me the most optimism looking forward.
Right. I think it was a great performance. I think he played really well. I'm really excited for this season, but he didn't play elite. So I just want to be clear on that. All right. But that's enough. We beat West Virginia by 25, whatever it was. Let's move on to why are we playing this game, Zach? I don't even want to get into it. Like, I don't even want to talk about the players. I don't want to talk about the stats. I wrote down, I'm going to hold it up to my camera here. I wrote down a half a page of notes. That's it. Half a page. Because why are we playing against an FCS school? Like, I don't get it. So Zach, I'm going to let you get on your soapbox. Do you want me to set a timer? Is this going to take a couple minutes?
I'll try to be brief, but yeah, why? I mean, I'll start where you ended. Why? And I even thought the Big Ten initiated a rule here recently that they actually wanted to prohibit their teams from playing FCS schools. It's mind-boggling. If you're a season ticket holder, you have 7 home games in a season, potentially only 6 if you have a road non-conference game. And so one of them's Delaware, one of them's UMass, and I'm going to bleed into a bigger discussion here, but and this started last year for me. Some of you may recall, most of you probably don't. After the Auburn win, I mean, I was on cloud 9. So we went down into SEC country.
Yep.
We kicked the crap out of Auburn. Obviously, they weren't that great last year, but still, that was awesome. It was like a euphoric afternoon for me. And as I'm scrolling Twitter and the blogs and everything after the game, I come across Franklin was asked, do you anticipate scheduling more home and homes like this with power programs? Which to me was like, well, hell yeah. We just had a home and home with Auburn. We won them both. The game at home was great, and it was the ESPN primetime game that week. We go down to Auburn. It's the 3:30 afternoon CBS time slot.
Yep.
The crowd we ran their crowd out of the stadium. The answer is yes, right? Surely the answer is yeah. We're gonna continue to try to have these types of matchups. And Franklin, very matter of factly and sort of arrogantly says, well, not really. No, why? Why would we? I mean, the goal is to win the Big Ten conference. The goal is to win the conference, right? Okay, so you lose to Auburn. It has nothing to do with whether or not you win. It has no impact on whether or not you win the Big Ten conference.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think it can, in a 12-team playoff, it can only help you to schedule a marquee non-conference game every year. I mean, you're not going to miss the playoffs solely because you lost a big non-conference game. It's going to take a couple other losses in conference.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think as you see it go to 12, those last couple teams that get in, I actually think you're going to have a ton of 9. You're going to have a bunch of teams, maybe a 12-0 team and a couple 11-1 teams, a few 10-2 teams. And the last spots every year in the 12-team playoff are going to be 9-3 teams. And there's going to be some 9-3 teams that went 6-3 in the Big Ten again, and just got lucky and didn't see Michigan and Ohio State or USC and didn't play anybody in the non-con versus another program that maybe went like 7-2 in their conference, but has a nice feather in their cap because they beat somebody in the non-con. Not only do I think it's just dumb from like a PR standpoint for him to have taken that position, I also think it's illogical if your goal is to win national championships and to make the playoffs and win national championships. It's just, this type of scheduling is not going to suffice. And I'm fine with West Virginia. Like, I think they're down right now, but it's a power program. They're in the Big 12. I'm not saying like we need to be playing Georgia and Alabama every year.
Yeah.
I'm actually saying we maybe want to stay away from like that type of marquee game, but like the Auburns and, you name it, whatever conference.
Play Vanderbilt. Like, I mean, it's still an SEC.
Anybody,
like, I would rather be playing almost anybody in America than Delaware this week, and especially UMass, because I mean, we're going to get into Delaware. I know I said I don't want to, but we're going to. But UMass, I think, is worse than Delaware, and I mean, I just don't.
Yeah, they've been teetering on. I mean, that's the thing too. Is sometimes these FCS teams are actually like can be kind of spunky because they're used to being good. Like they come in, both UMass and Delaware are going to walk into Beaver Stadium thinking we're probably not going to win. But Delaware comes in like we win most of the time. We're a winning program. Yep. We're used to winning. We're accustomed to winning.
They're going to the playoffs in FCS this year.
Yeah, and so you saw it with Villanova a couple years ago, where like they kind of hung around and actually, the one thing that I think you can take away from this game, for me, is looking back to the Villanova game, is it's an immediate barometer. It's like if you don't immediately just start kicking the snot out of them in the first quarter, or they're able to exploit a flaw, whether it's offense, defense, special teams, that's an immediate problem. And I think going back to 2021, at the time we didn't know it, but we couldn't run the ball in Villanova. We just couldn't. And I think we identified that as perhaps a problem, but nobody really knew until later in the year when it started to rear its ugly head. It was like, wow, now it kind of makes sense. We couldn't run on Villanova. Now it explains why we can't run on anyone in the Big Ten. But I mean, I'll get off my soapbox here, but I just think it's irrational for Franklin. And I don't know if it's all him. I don't know if it was Sandy Barber or where Pat Kraft is at from a scheduling standpoint. But, I pulled up Penn State's future non-con schedules. And again, I'm willing to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that perhaps all of the Pac-12 editions has been percolating under the surface for the last few years. And so they were hesitant to schedule too aggressively without knowing what's our schedule going to look like going forward. Like, are we going to be playing a 10-game Big Ten schedule? Are we going to be playing Michigan and Ohio State and USC and Oregon every year? And so I can maybe buy that. I don't know if that's the answer, but that's something that's logical. But so we have a home and home with West Virginia. And then in 2025, right now we have Nevada and Villanova on the books. We still have an open date for a non-con game because, and to be fair, they had Virginia Tech scheduled for 2025. But when we didn't go down there in 2020 because of COVID, they used the escape clause in the contract, I guess, to get out of that.
Figure that one out. That would be a great. I mean, obviously, now that Brent Pry's there, maybe that'd be a little weird. But like Virginia Tech would be a great matchup for us.
Yeah,
I mean, we should beat them.
Yeah, and that's where again, I'm not saying like let's get Alabama and Georgia on the schedule, but West Virginia, Pitt, Virginia Tech, trying to like play regional Power 5 programs makes sense to me. But then, and here's the worst one is 2026. We have Marshall, at Temple, and Buffalo.
That's awful.
We're giving Temple a road game. And this is where, and some of the folks aren't going to like this in the comment section, and maybe we're going to get some more unsubscribes, but I agree with Pat Narduzzi. Pat Narduzzi is right. Penn State is ducking Pittsburgh. And if you want to be the high and mighty Penn State fan that says we're too good for Pittsburgh, they don't deserve us, they're a sinking, they're on the sinking ship ACC, and there's no lifeboats for them. Why would we help them? I agree, but you can't then turn around and say, we're going to schedule a home and home with Temple.
Right.
Or in 27 and 28, we're going to schedule a home and home with Syracuse. If we're playing Syracuse and we're giving up home games and the home revenue from a home game to play Syracuse on the road or Temple on the road, why wouldn't you play Pitt? Why wouldn't you play West Virginia more often? Why wouldn't you try to get Virginia Tech on the schedule or North Carolina or whoever? I mean, anybody. I mean, I would take Boston College, but years in a new look Big Ten with a 12-team playoff, and your non-conference schedule is Marshall, Temple, Buffalo. You better go 10-2. You better not slip up in the Big Ten, because if there's a horde of 9-3 teams looking to get in the back end of that 12-team playoff, you're not getting in because of that non-conference schedule. And I think if you think you're one of the elite programs in the country, which I think Penn State thinks they're back to now, to me it just looks cowardly. So I don't like Narduzzi. I don't like giving him credit. But I think he's right. I think if Penn State didn't want to play Pitt, I'd be okay with that. And I think there's a good explanation for that. But then you can't turn around and have these cowardly non-conference schedules. I think the answer is we're too good for Pitt, so we're going to play a home and home with Auburn, right? Or we're going to try to get a home and home with Utah, or some national, something better. But if you're not doing that, then what are we doing? Okay. Off the soapbox.
Totally agree. So we have a couple comments here. Doing this live now for the second time. I put up Robert Kaufman's first comment there. Robert, we totally agree with you. That's the whole rant we just went on. Thank you for tuning in. Totally agree. This weekend college football is not very good. You'll see that when we get to our pick'ems later. Trying to find a super dog this week was a struggle, and we'll get to that later. But at its core, we both hate that Penn State's playing Delaware this week, and we're not fans. Zach, here's another comment from Robert. I'll let you address this one. I hate Pitt. We keep out recruiting them and should give them no credibility. I totally agree, and that's what Zach is saying. Like, if you want to just come out and say we're not going to play Pitt, that's fine. I agree with that. Let's not play Pitt, but then let's not play at Temple. Like, what are we doing? Playing at Temple. So I think that's where Zach's going with that. Totally agree with you, though, Robert. There are options that aren't Pitt. But
here's another one, Notre Dame. We
haven't played Notre Dame since what, 08-09? Was that when we had that home and home?
Yeah, I mean, I think Penn State had a home and home in 07, 08, or 08-09.
Yeah,
and those are the only two times they've played Notre Dame. I think since going back to probably I think they had a stretch where they played them every year in the 80s for a little while, and it's just. There's options. I mean, Cincinnati's in the Big 12 now. I would take Cincinnati, just something
right.
So yeah, but thank you, Robert, for chiming in. And I agree. I don't like Pitt either, but I still think Penn State owes it to itself to be logical and sensible in its scheduling, especially because I think it's going to matter. I mean, it matters now. And we like to bash on Michigan. Look at Michigan's non-conference this year.
Yeah,
we love to make fun of that. Well, that's going to be us in a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Completely agree. But I guess it's time to talk a little bit about Delaware. So even though from a scheduling point of view, we hate it. But at the end of the day, this is the game on the schedule. The players got to come ready to play. Us as fans, we're going to still tune in and watch it. So just some things about Delaware. And then, Zach, if you have any comments. Found it interesting that this is the first ever meeting. I don't know. I just felt like I thought they played them before, but I guess I'm just thinking of what was that quarterback that transferred there from Penn State? Devlin, Pat Devlin.
Pat Devlin, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess maybe I was just thinking of that. So it just kind of caught me off guard.
The other thing to note, look like Michigan too. So maybe
they do look like Michigan. The other thing to note is even though they are an FCS school, they are a pretty good FCS school. They're ranked number 19 in this week's rankings. Obviously, I have said on this podcast now 2 or 3 times, I think they would beat like a UMass that's on our schedule. I think there's a lot of teams at the bottom of FBS that Delaware would be competitive with. So we shouldn't be playing them. But that is what it is. Their coach is Ryan Carty. It's his second year. He went to Delaware, was a backup quarterback his whole career there. He's also their play caller. Franklin said that they run an RPO spread, and Zach, you pointed this out as well. He said that they're going to do a ton of quick passes. Like they're going to pass it a lot. Last week, they passed it 45 times in their win over Stony Brook. They're going to pass it a lot, but it's going to be quick screen passes, tunnel screens, curl routes, slants. Like they're not trying to take the top off of anybody. They're trying to nickel and dime you down the field and then bust you for a big play when you bite on something. And that's what Franklin said he fully expects. So since we're on the offense, I guess just to mention a couple names. Again, this wasn't a huge deep dive like it was West Virginia, like it will be Illinois next week, but just a couple names for our fans out there to be dialed into. Ryan O'Connor is their quarterback. He can play. He's a redshirt sophomore. It's his second career start. Last week he threw for 346 yards on 24 completions, but he did throw two interceptions, which is a big concern, and he was sacked 4 times. They have a very veteran O-line from what I read. I didn't write down specific names. I read that they have a very veteran O-line, but they are prone to giving up sacks. And if Stony Brook can get 4 sacks on them, I would think Penn State should be licking their chops that they're going to get to Ryan O'Connor a lot. They're also really high on this transfer quarterback, Zach Marker, who will definitely see playing time against us and not just in mop-up duty whenever it's out of hand. He was 4 for 7 last week. So their 414 passing yards last week was second in all of FCS. 414 passing yards is a ton. But again, that's on 28 completions. So they're not throwing huge passes. Obviously they're getting some. And then I guess I'll just hit the running backs. And then Zach, I think you said you had some info on some of their wide receivers. Their best running back is Marcus Yarns. They kind of have a style almost like Penn State, where Marcus Yarns is the so-called home run hitter. He's the guy who in the CAA, I think that's what they're in, right? The CAA.
Yep.
He has the breakaway speed. If he gets to the secondary, he's usually gone. And then they have Kyron Cumby, who is more of that all-purpose, that Katron Allen type back, who will come in and can bust carries, absolutely, but is more of that traditional old school pick up 3 yards in a cloud of dust type of running back. So Marcus Yarns and Kyron Cumby, those are both of those big running backs. Quincy Watson is maybe another name to kind of watch out of the backfield, but I don't think they're going to run it. I really don't. They rushed for 184 yards last week, 145 yards last week. 184 if you take out some of O'Connor's sacks. I think they're just going to try to throw it. I think Ryan Carty as a coach is going to say, you know what, we are to our commenter's point, Robert Kaufman. We're so big of underdogs that they don't even quantify it because it's FBS versus FCS. So we're just going to go out here and we're going to work on things to get ready because they are expected to go to the college football playoffs in FCS, and they're expected to win a game or two. They did last year, and they're expected to do it again. So, Zach, I'll turn it over to you, to our guy Duncan. Duncan was with us very, very early. Oh, it's not loading here. Oh, sorry, Duncan. I'll get you here when we can. There you are. Duncan has been with us from the beginning. We don't know Duncan. We have a lot of followers and friends that we do actually know, but we don't know Duncan. But he's commenting on our video here, and we're big fans of Duncan. So glad you're here too. So Zach, do you have any comments there on Delaware's offense, specifically maybe their wide receivers? Since I feel like I hit everybody else.
Yeah. So the one thing to take away from their Stony Brook game, which again, it's hard to know what level of competition they're getting within, that FCS level with Stony Brook, but they definitely spread the ball around. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They had 8 guys that caught at least 2 passes. And very interestingly for me was they have a guy, Joshua Youngblood, and I actually recognize that name. And if you look at his bio, so he started out at Kansas State. And in 2019, he was the Big 12 Special Teams Player of the Year at Kansas State. He played in all 13 games as a wide receiver, and he returned a nation-leading 3 kickoff returns for touchdowns. So I assume he's going to be somebody to watch from a special team standpoint at Delaware. For whatever reason, he didn't play much in 2020. The COVID year is maybe perhaps part of that. He ends up transferring to Rutgers and never really sort of blew up as a wide receiver at Rutgers, but he did have some special teams moments, and now he's at Delaware. And there's actually kind of a theme across the receivers. He's a fifth year senior. They've got another guy, Kim Wimberly, who is a transfer from Harvard. He played all the way back in 2018 at Harvard. So they have some older guys at wide receiver. Wimberly is 6 foot, 200 pounds, so he's got a pretty good frame. Their leading receiver from the first game is a guy by the name of Chandler Harvin. He is a transfer from Sam Houston State. Same thing, graduate. He's a fifth year senior, and he's 6'2", 200 pounds. So they've got some guys with sort of D1 type bodies, and with both experience at higher levels in Delaware. So perhaps if there's one area where they feel like they have some guys that can play at this level, maybe it's in the passing game. And again, I think from what little I saw of their highlights from the first game, they do seem like the type of passing offense where they want to get it out quick. They want to spread it, get it into multiple guys' hands. It is interesting. You mentioned that I think Stony Brook had like 4 sacks. So how those two things go together is a little strange to me, because I think they seem like a kind of a quick hitting passing offense. And if you're Penn State, I mean, for me, this is the type of game where I'd love to see a pass rush come from just the front four, right? Just you don't need to get too exotic. Let's challenge your front four to say, we want to get home with 4, because when you start playing the Ohio States and the Michigans and if you can do that, that's massive. I mean, it's just a simple numbers game. And the more guys you got to commit to the box, the less guys you have back in coverage. And the teams that can get after the quarterback with just their front four, it just opens everything up defensively. And I hate to always talk about Ohio State, but I go back to all these games against Ohio State the last few years with Penn State, and it's the Chase Youngs and the Nick Bosas and the Joey Bosas, and last year the JT Tuamaloa, where they just send 4 guys and their defensive ends can just ragdoll the offensive tackles. And so I want to see some of that, because I think we didn't see. I thought we got decent pressure against West Virginia, and part of the reason we didn't see a lot of sacks, I think, was Green just bailed out of the pocket fairly early, because that's his strength. But I'd like to see Isaac and Chop Robinson and then Dennis Sutton and maybe even some of the defensive tackles. I'd like to see some consistent pressure coming from the front four without having to commit, Carter and Jacobs and the linebacking core. So, but yeah, it seems to me they got some guys at receiver who are not going to be phased by this stage. Again, it's kind of strange to me to see a guy out of Delaware who's a former Big 12 special teams player of the year.
Yeah, it's a big one. And you mentioned a name there that maybe we should talk about for just a quick second. Abdul Carter obviously was in the news this week. From what I read from Franklin, he said it was handled, and it sounds like they're not going to do anything. So, Zach, in your opinion, do you think it is I don't know how I want to phrase this, but do you think it would be worse for them to say, yes, Abdul Carter, you're suspended for the Delaware game, or for them to say, it's handled, it's fine, we're moving on? For what he was arrested for specifically, and I guess arrested probably isn't the right word, but that was the word ESPN used, right? But I don't think he spent the night in jail or anything.
No, I think he was just charged, and
correct.
And
so
there's a whole I mean, we could go all the way down the rabbit hole, about how you feel about whether marijuana possession is that big of a deal, and I think clearly the team and the school think it's not that big of a deal because. And in a roundabout way to answer your question, I think it would be very strange if all of a sudden he got suspended or disciplined in a way that kept him from playing in this game, despite having played in the West Virginia game and the team knowing about this from back in August. So it seems to me, and again, Franklin he never tells the press anything. So who knows, how they extracted their pound of flesh from this guy. But I get the sense that there was some level of punishment doled out that the team and the school felt was sufficient, and that's that. I think it just would be really weird if they knew this happened in August. He plays against West Virginia, then the charges are filed and it's public, and then all of a sudden he's sitting against Delaware. I don't know. That would just be odd to me, but
I agree. That's what I was thinking. But I saw so many comments this week saying, "Well, let's just make a statement and suspend him because it's Delaware. It doesn't really matter." And I agree. I think it would be weird to me. And I mean, obviously,
some folks were commenting. I think we talked about it a little bit after the game. I don't think he had his best game against West Virginia.
Right.
Definitely didn't show up in the stat sheet. Looked a little lost, perhaps dazed and confused at times with Garrett Green in the open field. And so you wonder if maybe if yeah, even though it's relatively minor, the pending criminal charges was maybe something that's hanging over his head, and perhaps
Sure.
now that it's out there, it can be addressed, and he can do his community service or whatever he's going to get through the judicial system, and just kind of move on. So,
Yeah.
not great news, but I mean, I will say this: when I pulled up the article that started with Abdul Carter charged with,
Right.
this was about the least scared I could be from the rest of the headline as far as that goes.
Totally agree. So, like I said, since we mentioned him there, we probably should have said something quick. But anyways, let's move on. I don't have a ton about Delaware's defense. What I do know is that last year they ranked second overall in FCS in total defense, which is awesome for them, and would give me a hair of concern for Penn State. Obviously, not FCS and FBS are different, but the fact that they're second overall in FCS would give me a little bit of concern as far as that whole, like you said, with Villanova a couple years ago, like their defense was really, really good. Just putting away a team super early that you're better than. But from that team, they graduated 9 players. So 9 out of 11 starters, they're gone. They're done. They've used up their eligibility. And in order to replace those guys, they must not have felt super happy about or content with the guys that they had on the roster, because they brought in like 7 or 8 guys that are transfers that are starting for them this year. A couple names that really stood out to me. Like I said, I try not to do it too much because it frustrates me so much that we're even playing this game. But the 3 names that I wrote down, one was Akori Lyde, who transferred from Wisconsin. I remember that name from last year. He's a cornerback. He only had a couple. What do you have? 2 tackles last week, but he's one of these transfers that maybe it's taken him a little bit to get in. You never know with transfers how fluid their transition is. They have a D lineman who I think is decent from Old Dominion last year, which still I guess they're what 1AA or they're FCS also, aren't they?
No, they're actually FBS now.
Oh, they are FBS. Okay, all
they're
right.
They're either in the Sun Belt or Conference USA, I think.
Okay. His name is Kayshawn Hunter. He's 277 pounds. He's a pretty big fella. He had a TFL last week against Stony Brook. Just somebody that stood out to me a little bit. And then the one that really stood out to me, and you'll like this Zach, if you didn't see it. This guy's from Westchester University. So he just transferred in. He's a grad transfer from Westchester University. He had 262 tackles in his 3 years of starting at Westchester, which I don't care that that's D2. 262 tackles in 3 years. That's a ton of tackles, man. He ranks 4th all time in Westchester University history with 39 TFLs. And he also had 11 sacks in his career. So he's a 6'1", 235-pound linebacker. He had 7 tackles last week. That's just cool to me for a guy from Westchester to be putting up those types of numbers. That's pretty cool. The only other thing I'll mention is that even though they threw 3 interceptions last week, they also intercepted 3 passes, one of which was brought back 50 yards for a touchdown by Ty Davis. They are a team that is at their best when their corners and their safeties are playing really well. I don't remember if it was a direct quote or a paraphrase, but the coach said something along the lines of they aren't a team that's going out trying to get a lot of sacks. That's not their game plan. Their game plan is to play great secondary defense, and if they get a sack out of it, it's a coverage sack. They run a lot of 3 safety formations, which James Franklin mentioned was kind of weird to plan for this week. It's not something you see a ton of, especially at the FBS level. So they just do some things that are a little different, and I think they play to their strengths. I mean, we talked last year a couple games where we had felt like 10 DBs out there, and that was one of the strengths we had. So they play to their strengths. But that's really all I have on their defense. I don't know if you have anything, or if you want to hit Penn State offense at the same time, what you're looking for. How long do you think Aller's going to play? How many yards is Prabula going to throw for? Whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just touch on Delaware a little bit. I think it's really interesting. We talk about the transfer portal a lot because that's sort of a dominant part of the conversation in college football now. And talk about best of both worlds. If you're like at the Delaware level or an FCS program, you've got guys. We just talked about a couple guys from Wisconsin and Kansas State that you've brought in. Simultaneously, we're talking about a kid from Westchester So as far as the
Right.
transfer portal goes, you're looking up to the highest levels to see who are guys that are maybe a little bit overmatched at that level and are looking for a little bit of a lower level where they can perhaps be a better player. And then let's also look below us to Division II and see, are there guys that are dominating down there that want to make the jump? So that's an interesting,
Yeah.
totally unrelated to Penn State, but that for me is really interesting to think about because we're talking about the portal all the time and we're talking about what Colorado's doing. And it's mostly just like Power 5 teams just kind of like picking players off of each other's rosters. But what Delaware is doing is totally different. And that's kind of unique and interesting. But as far as what Penn State's offense should be doing, I mean, I'll play the role of Jordo here, and he loves saying, whenever we're playing an overmatched team, like I just want to see, Singleton and Allen each have 25 carries, and I don't want to throw the ball, more than 10 times. And I really would like to, just come out, run the ball. I want to see a lot of Trey Potts. I want you mentioned Aller. I think this is a great game with the new rule that allows you to play kids in 4 games without burning their red shirt. I think you get to Prabula early. You give him plenty of time. And then I think you want to see the freshman quarterback, Jackson
Totally
Smollett,
agree.
as well. I mean, I think there's a couple games, maybe UMass, maybe Northwestern, where you can, if you're kind of game planning, and it's kind of disrespect. You don't want to be disrespectful and overlook teams and think, let's plan out the games where we're going to have massive blowouts and when we can get our guys in. But I think you kind of have to do that in today's day and age with the allowance of playing guys for 4 games and not burning their red shirt. Plus, you have to be worried. I just mentioned the portal. You got to be fearing the portal at the end of the season, keeping guys happy. I think that's part of the reason why I think we may see Franklin go to Bo a lot earlier than he has typically gone to backup quarterbacks in the past, because I think he wants to keep him happy. And I think, with last year with Aller, I think it was really easy to say, look, Sean Clifford's the guy. We're going to play you some, but like this is his last year, and then you're the man. You're the man for however long you want to stay here. And so maybe there wasn't as big a fear about the portal. But, again, if you're Bo Prabula, and everything I've read about him is he's just a Penn State guy through and through, and he loves Penn State. But you want to keep him happy. You also want to play the backup as much as you can so that the backup is ready. And I think James Franklin will make it a point for the rest of his coaching career to never have another season like we had in 2021, where there was only one quarterback in the quarterback room that was prepared to play. And whether that's his fault through the transfer portal or whatever, who knows? But the fact of the matter was that season pretty much went down the drain because we didn't have more than one quarterback ready to play. So whether it's quarterback, whether it's running back, I mentioned Trey Potts, the receiver room, we've talked about. It seems like there's a top 2. There's Lambert Smith and Harrison Waller for kind of the top 2 guys. And then I really think Liam Clifford, and what I'm hearing from practice as well, is he's kind of sliding into that third receiver, slot receiver role, which, by the way, white receiver, number 2, tell me that guy doesn't look like he's going to be a future like New England Patriot, Wes Welker, Danny Amendola. But that's neither here nor there. But after that, I think, Dante Cephas had a nice catch and then a drop last week. Malik McLean had a really nice showing. Then there's some young guys, Caden Saunders, Amari Evans was out last week. This is the type of game where you get kind of deep into your bench, and it's an opportunity to tell guys, okay, now we get to see what you got, right? Like you want to climb the depth chart. It's maybe hard to do at practice. Well, here's a great opportunity. Same thing, offensive line, right? Vega Ione, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, at guard. I want to see a lot of him. I want to see a lot of Drew Shelton. There's no need to have Olu Fashanu out there.
Yeah.
Probably beyond the second quarter. I want to get Drew Shelton out there. Again, keep him happy, but also make sure that he's getting live reps. And then defensively, I mean, we always rotate a ton defensively, but it's a game where I think you go deep into the bench. You try out some different rotations to see who you got and make sure that we know at this point of the year, you got to start to know what your rotations are, and you start to kind of get guys into their roles, right? We don't want to be trying to figure out who's who halfway into the season. And this is the type of game where I think you can go a long way in doing that.
Yep, totally agree. I think you summed everything up there really well. This is a game that we need to get some guys some reps. I mean, practice reps are only so valuable, and obviously practice reps are great, but there's nothing like playing another opponent, even if it's Delaware, even if it's some school for blind sisters. I mean, you're just playing somebody else. All right. So totally agree with you there. I think that pretty much wraps us up for this one. We got a couple more comments here, and because this is I'm just so happy that we're live and people actually are watching us. I'm going to keep putting them up. Paul says Penn State by 50. We'll see here in a second, Paul. We're going to give our scores predictions very, very shortly. So we'll see if you're right. And then KOS 22 US. I think you just liked our story on Instagram too. So shout out to you for following us over on Instagram. Lots of 2s and 3s should get playing times. Hopefully, that is definitely the goal. All right. So Zach, last thing, you have exactly 1 minute to say something about this. The game is on Peacock. We kind of have different opinions on this. 1 minute. Tell me why you're frustrated or annoyed by this.
I guess where does it end, right? Like if I think it's the type of thing where they know the streaming, the TV providers, the cable providers know these college fan bases they hold us hostage. Like we can bitch and moan about it all we want, but they know we live and die with Penn State. So it starts out right now. I think most Big Ten teams have like one game on Peacock. Well, where does it go? Where does it go from here, right? And with the Big Ten TV contract, keep in mind like they built that around 14 teams. Now it's up to 18. I wouldn't be shocked if the league went to 20. They obviously want Notre Dame. Like all of a sudden you have like 10 league games all on a Saturday, or maybe there's one on Thursday. Like there's not enough TV slots for all those games. Right. And are we going to see more and more streaming games? And it's just, I don't know. It's emblematic of everything else that I think is, I don't want to be hyperbolic and say it's ruining, college sports,
yeah.
But I think we're all, and not that we're that old, but everybody of like a certain age can see how things have changed in the last 2 decades, we'll say. And I don't know. It's for me, it's not even the $5 a month or whatever it is that I'd have to subscribe and then just immediately cancel. It's just, and I don't want to sound elitist, but it's like you should be able, in today's day and age, you should turn on the TV and find Penn State every Saturday. It should be that simple. You should turn on the TV and find the Ohio State game. It should be that simple. Ohio State's playing Maryland later in the season, and I saw the Ohio State fans going nuts, and I kind of chuckled, but you should not be able, there should be no situation in which you turn on the TV on a fall Saturday and you cannot access an Ohio State Big Ten game. That's just crazy to me. And first world problems, but
yeah,
there, I'm back off the soapbox again.
Okay. And I'm on the other side of this, that I could not care less. I have 2 main reasons for not caring less. One, I think of all the streaming services, I think Peacock is the best bang for its buck. It has the most live sports of any other streaming service. If you like the NFL, which I would assume a lot of people do, you get every Sunday night game. The Chiefs are playing there right now. I don't have my Chiefs flag up anymore like in my old studio. Chiefs are playing right now, so you can watch that on Peacock. If you're a motorsports fan, they have tons of motorsports coverage on Peacock. And again, like you said, it is pretty cheap. It's only $5 a month, which really is not bad in the grand scheme of Disney Plus now being like 15, Netflix going up to like 15 or 18, I think coming soon. So that's my first thing. I don't really care. The second thing goes back to the whole first like 30 minutes of this podcast. If we weren't playing Delaware this week, the game's not on Peacock. If we're playing Auburn this week, the game is not on Peacock. If we're playing Pitt, the game is still probably not on Peacock. Now, is our game against Rutgers or Maryland potentially going on Peacock because we have it in our contract now that one game's going on there? Yeah, and that I get that would be frustrating. But at the end of the day, if we're going to schedule a team like Delaware, I mean, we kind of deserve to be on a Peacock behind a paywall. So that's my thing. Your comment about Ohio State, Maryland, totally agree. That's a game that probably should be on TV, especially because Maryland, is probably going to be undefeated at that time.
That could actually be a huge game.
Yeah, and the way Ohio State's playing, teaser for coming up. I mean, I get it.
The one thing I'll say is if this TV contract that the Big Ten locked in that combined CBS and NBC and Fox, if the price of not having to turn on ESPN and ABC and the Disney family of networks and getting away from all that crap for the Big Ten is me having to watch one game on Peacock, then maybe it's worth it. Because I thought NBC, I thought the NBC production, not to go back to West Virginia, but I thought the production of the NBC game was pretty good, honestly. And Todd Blackledge is really good. And but yeah, it's a pain, but it's very much a first world problem to complain about. I just, yeah. You
And
make some good points, and
that
for me,
last
it's not even about like it's not that
right.
it's not that they're extracting that much money from fans.
It's the
It's just kind of
principle
like
of
the
the thing.
principle of it. But
Yeah. And your comment there about NBC, that's the other thing. I think of all sports broadcasting, I just think NBC does the best job across the board. Like maybe you might like CBS for football a little bit better or anything like that. But I just think from Sport A to Sport Z, I think NBC has the best coverage. So if this is the payoff for getting Saturday Night Football on NBC, that you have to have one game on Peacock each year, I think that's a fair trade for me because, like you said, I thought last week's production value was really good. It's going to be pretty high, even though it's on Peacock this week. The production value is going to be good. Yeah, it's like their fourth string reporters, but I mean, honestly, if Charlotte at Maryland is the Saturday night game on NBC this week, we might see Todd Blackledge at Penn State again. Who knows?
yeah, I mean, and
he's not.
Like I said with the split, I mean, you're gonna have most years you're gonna have Penn State probably playing at least one NBC primetime game, probably playing 2 or 3 CBS 3:30 afternoon prime slot with Gary Danielson,
Big Noons,
and a couple Fox Big Noons with Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson. So yeah. I think from a production standpoint, it gets you a couple different networks with a couple different announcing crews, all of which I like to varying degrees. I will see if anybody sounds off in the comments, but Penn State used to play a lot back before Franklin got things humming. And maybe during like the Bill O'Brien era too, would play a lot of like crazy Big Ten games with like Beth Mowins and other
on like ESPNU at
some of these really crappy ESPN
Yeah.
announcers that were just goofballs and Dusty Dvoracek. And so I'm kind of excited. I really like Todd Blackledge. I really like Joel Klatt, friend of the program.
Yes.
And even the CBS, like there's just something about turning on. It was weird watching Ohio State, Indiana on it, but turning on that 3:30 CBS game, you hear the music and the production value there is really good too. And so anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And this has obviously gone a lot longer, but we're just two guys talking about football. So it is what it is. Let's move on. Zach, what is your score prediction? We didn't get one from Jordan. Totally our fault. I don't know how we didn't ask him in the group chat to give us a score prediction. My prediction for what his prediction would be is 69-0. Knowing Jordan, I think that would be his prediction. So Zach, what's your score prediction for Penn State, Delaware?
Yeah, I'm gonna go 56-7.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna keep it a little bit closer. I'm gonna say 48-10. I don't think that's 38 points. I don't think it's as big of a blowout as maybe it should be. Could it be 48-0 and they get 10 straight points? Yeah, possibly. I don't know. I just have a feeling 48-10. So
yeah, I definitely don't think it's one of those games where we're like Drew Aller's still in there like in the fourth quarter and we're trying to run it up, or Oklahoma, they beat Arkansas State last week like 73-0 or something. Yeah. I think.
And Oregon put up like 81, didn't they?
That's just.
Yeah. All right. So for those of you that are only here for Penn State, that will wrap up our Penn State coverage. But obviously, there's more college football to talk about. We're going to try to keep this at less than 30 minutes to put us at an hour and 15 minutes for sure. We're going to run through our top 25 super quick. We'll put Jordan's up on the board. Maybe just hit his top 10 for him since he's not here. And then, Zach, you can go through your top 25, hit any comments you want. We'll have our pick'ems at the end, give our super dogs, and then we'll be out of here. So here is Jordan's top 25. Hopefully the graphic looks as good as he did it last week. I spent all day at school not teaching teenagers, but instead doing this. His top 10 had a couple shuffles last week. So he has Georgia at 1, Florida State at 2, Michigan 3, Penn State 4 as his current playoff team. He did move Ohio State way down to 10. Again, he's not here to defend any of his picks, so add it in the comments how much you hate his top 25. But let's go to Zach. Zach, let's go ahead and run through your top 25, starting at 25.
Sure. Well, I'll start at starting at 25. I think Tulane had a kind of a under the radar win over South Alabama, who's expected to be pretty good in the Sun Belt. I got UCLA at 24. They're one of the teams, and I've been banging the drum for the Pac-12, and probably will continue to all year. They're maybe one of the the Pac-12 is kind of a have and have not league this year. It seems like, and I think they're one of the teams that nobody's really talking about. They're not one of the bad teams. They're not one of the top end teams. They have a chance to sneak up on some people. Iowa at 23, not super impressed with what I saw in their win against Utah State, but they're going to hang around in the back half of the top 25, I think, by virtue of that defense. Wisconsin at 22, sort of the same as Iowa, really kind of a lackluster start to the Buffalo game. And then, we've heard so much about how they're going to be transitioning to the air raid. And then here we are 1 game in and they're like, yeah, you know what? Let's give it to Braylon Allen 22 times and let him just destroy this MAC defense. So it'll be interesting to see Wisconsin if they kind of have an identity crisis over the course of this season where they're trying to transition into something new, but it's just so hard to break those old habits. They're Wisconsin, right? It's going to take a couple years till you change the roster, number one, but also just old habits die hard. Texas A&M, number 21. They got an interesting game going to Miami this week. I think that'll be one of our pick'em games. Duke, I have at 20. Obviously, everybody should have been watching that game. That was an awesome game. It was very opportunistic by Duke, and they looked like the better team. I think we could probably devote a whole podcast to talking about Clemson and where they're going and what their troubles look like and why, but we won't. And I don't have them in the top 25, so I'm not going to talk about them at all. I bumped LSU down to 19. This is probably one of those prisoner of the moment type things where I think they're probably better than, I don't know that there's 18 teams better than them right now, but they just did not look good in the second half of that game against Florida State. But I think there's a lot of talent there. K-State at 18, they played a nobody, not really going to waste time with them. Ole Miss, 17, they played a nobody, not going to talk about them much. Oklahoma, 16, they murdered Arkansas State. They made Butch Jones cry on the sideline. 15, North Carolina, hand up. I had that one wrong. I thought South Carolina was the more talented team, and I think that's exactly what I said last week. And North Carolina beat them, and they kind of beat them handily. So credit to Mac Brown. I said North Carolina was just the quarterback, Drake May, and he's really good. And I wasn't, my doubting of UNC had nothing to do with him. I just didn't know that they had other pieces to the degree that they do. 14, Oregon State. I thought they looked really good beating San Jose State by pretty much the same margin as USC. That's why I have USC right at 13. I think they're kind of neck and neck. I have Texas at 12. Kind of a sluggish start against Rice. We're going to find out about Texas, obviously. They play Alabama this week. I have Notre Dame at 11. They've looked really good, but they haven't played anybody, so we don't really know a whole lot about them yet. I've got Oregon at 10. I like Oregon, but we don't know anything about them because they played the Blind Sisters of the Poor last week and just beat them to a pulp. I've got Tennessee at 9. I'm not, nobody's high on Virginia this year, but I think they had a really dominant performance against a Power 5 team that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. I've got Ohio State all the way down at 8. I think, if you just looked at the box score, you'd say, it wasn't a great win, but they went on the road and they beat Indiana. If you watch that game, I think the takeaway has to be they did not look good. They could not run the ball against an Indiana defense that was on the field the whole game. So one thing about Indiana is they are going to struggle to score on anybody this year. They don't have a quarterback. They've got some decent backs. The O-line's okay, but they cannot pass the ball. Kyle McCord didn't look great. They somehow, from a coaching standpoint, they didn't get the ball in Marvin Harrison and Emeka Ibuka's hands. I don't know how that happens. They just didn't look good, and I think they had you have to reflect that in the rankings. 7, Michigan. In hindsight, I maybe bumped them a little bit too much. I didn't think they looked great either. They looked better than Ohio State, but they didn't really run the ball the way that I expected them to run the ball against East Carolina. And maybe this is a good time to sort of give my overall insight into how I rank teams. Is I'm going to be very attentive to how do we look right now, right? So I'm going to be more of what does our resume say we are? How do we look right now? And less sort of projection based, like, well, I know this team's going to be good, with the exception of maybe Georgia, because when you've won 2 national titles in a row, I'm going to give them that. But so I think Michigan's probably better than number 7. But Washington looked really good against Boise State. This isn't a vintage Boise State squad, but that's still a decent Mountain West squad. And Washington looked really good. Michael Penix looked really good. They've got 2 stud receivers. I've got Utah all the way up at 5. That will probably raise some eyebrows. And I think, Devin, you yourself even mentioned, like, hey, does that mean you think Florida's good? No, I don't think Florida's that good. But I think if you look at who most of these teams played last week and the way that Utah just sort of physically dominated an SEC school with SEC players and high-level recruits without their starting quarterback, I was really, really impressed. I mean, and again, going back to the Georgia comparison, Utah is the 2-time defending Pac-12 champ. So until somebody else steps up in the Pac-12, they're a team that I'm just going to kind of give the benefit of the doubt to. I've got Penn State at 4. I mulled putting them at 3 because Alabama looked good. They crushed Middle Tennessee State, but I don't think we learned a whole lot from them. But again, we're going to learn about Alabama and Texas this week. I moved Georgia to 2, and I moved Florida State to 1. And I think right now, if you totally forget about last year and you don't look at projections of how you think this year is going to play out, how could you have anybody other than Florida State at 1? That's the way I look at it, is what have you shown me so far? And I know we're only 1 week in, but that's how I view the rankings. And for me, there was no bigger winner, even Colorado. And I didn't rank Colorado. In hindsight, I probably should have had them over like Tulane, but there was no bigger winner than Florida State in week 1 for me.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. So here's my top 25. I will keep it much shorter. Zach covered all those teams. I also have Tulane at 25. I don't really know too much about them. It's just one of those teams that, like, they were so good last year. They've got to be pretty talented. They win their first game. They deserve a spot. 24 Duke. Duke was way better than Clemson. I just think Clemson is trash, so I couldn't put Duke any higher. I mean, I had Clemson at like 17 last week whenever they were number 9 in the AP. So Duke at 24 I think is fair for now. I have Colorado at 23. I'm not super buying the hype, but for them to go on the road and win a true road game in week 1 with 727 new players, still pretty impressive. So I are they going to fall out in a couple weeks? Yeah. Is their ceiling 7-5? I think so. I think their absolute ceiling is 7-5, but for them to go 1-11 last year and 7-5 this year would be a huge improvement. 22 Oklahoma. I had them unranked at the preseason. They made the coach cry on the sidelines. Like, I don't feel like I learned a lot about them other than they can score against a bad team. So I put them in, but I'm still not sure anything about them. Wisconsin 21, Texas A&M 20, still that team that I think is poised for a breakout or poised to absolutely flop. I don't know if there's a middle ground for Texas A&M. I feel like they're either going to be really, really good or they're going to lose to Miami this week and they're going to just plummet. I'm not sure. Iowa at 19, this kind of counteracts what Zach was saying. I agree. I think Iowa was not impressive this week. They were one of my super dogs, called that. But I feel like they're going to start clicking and play better. Their defense is still really good. So I don't know. So I know Zach's opinion is he focuses more on like the current right now, and I have a little bit of that, but also I still think Iowa in the long run is going to be the Big Ten West champion, and I think they're better than Wisconsin, so I kept them ahead of Wisconsin. 18 Ole Miss, 17 UNC. Just like Zach said, I thought they were a one-man show, and they waxed South Carolina, who I thought was going to be good. I have LSU at 16. I'm kind of with you, Zach. I feel like maybe that's a little too low, which is kind of crazy to say for how bad they lost to Florida State. To have them at 16 after week 1, they're the only team with a loss in the top 25 for me. And I'm not sure. They just looked really not good. But I think they are good. So I'm confused. 15, I have K-State. 14, I have the Beavers. 13, Tennessee. 12, Oregon. 11, Texas. That big matchup this week against Alabama. That's going to be a good one. I assume horns down are going to lose that one, but hey, you never know. 10, Notre Dame. Notre Dame I have in my championship playoff 4. I'm still riding that train. I think Notre Dame goes undefeated this year, and Sam Hartman is either the Heisman or a runner-up. Maybe Bo Nix gets it. 9, Washington. Yep, they looked good against Boise State. Totally agree. I know Boise isn't quite what they were, but I thought they looked good. I watched a little bit of that game. 8, Utah. I just think Florida's terrible. I don't know what's going on. They need something, but I'm a little concerned that they only beat them by 10 points because I just think Florida's terrible. Now, if that game was in the Swamp, I think I probably would have had Utah in my top 5, even with just a 10-point win. To go on the road, like, and win in Florida, I think would have been really impressive. But to win at home, only by 10 against a team that I don't think is very good, or 11, whatever it was a weird score, I think. But whatever it was, they're still really good. They're still a Pac-12 contender, but I'm just not quite as high as Zach. 7, I have Ohio State. Echo everything you said. They were not impressive. That game was not even as close as the final score, or it was much closer than the final score indicated. Indiana's bad, and Ohio State could not do anything against them. So I'm confident now that Ohio State is not as good as they were. I wasn't sure, but I'm confident now that they're not the Ohio State of the past. 6, I have USC. Man, if USC can play any defense, I think they win the Pac-12 and they go to college football playoff, which is what I predicted last 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. But can they play any defense? I don't know. I'm not sure. So I have them at 5 or 6, excuse me. I have Bama down at 5. Just again, they weren't that impressive against Middle Tennessee. Like, it's just Middle Tennessee. So it is what it is. We'll learn a lot about them this week. If they win, they probably jump up to like number 2 to beat Texas. Penn State at 4, good solid win against a real team. Florida State at 3, the most impressive win of week 1 for sure. Michigan at 2 and Georgia at 1, definitely more of the traditional picks, as you would say. I don't think they did anything to lose those spots. Sure, you could definitely argue that Florida State should be ahead of them. I just don't think they lost those spots, so kept them there. So that's our top 25s. Different from the AP, but that's what we're here for. So let's go to our pick'ems, our last pick'ems here. Zach's usually in charge of this. He keeps our standings, our super dogs. He comes up with the games. Zach, you want to remind everyone what your standard is for which games you pick, because some people get confused by this, why we aren't picking certain games and stuff.
Yeah, so we're gonna try to pick only games with a touchdown spread or less. The idea being we want games that get all 3 of us thinking about picking either team, and we don't want just the same, us all 3 of us picking the same teams every time. So we're gonna not include some games that maybe are big games or hyped up games, and maybe include some games that people, ESPN and CBS aren't talking about, but are interesting games to me at least. And I think we have a couple of them this week that people might say, well, like Auburn Cal, why is that game on there?
Right. So,
and then of course the super dog, we've talked about that last week. The goal is got to be at least a 7-point dog. You get a point if the team covers, and then you get another point if they win. And if it's a 14-point spread or more, you get another point. If it's 21, you get another point. So, for example, last week, Devin, you went with Wyoming,
yep.
right? And they were a 14-point dog. So you got all 3. You got 3 points for that. And
yep.
Jordan and I, we didn't even cover. So we got goose eggs right now.
And just because I'm really going to toot my own horn here, I threw out 4 games last week. 3 of them were outright winners. So I feel really good. The only one that wasn't an outright winner was Iowa and Utah State, which still was covered.
Still covered, yeah.
I know. I felt good. That was what I was really good at last year too. I was last in our pick'ems, but I had that one stretch like in the middle of the year where I had like 8 straight super dogs, and it was just I had no idea what was happening anymore. And then I think UConn screwed it up for me because that's what they do in football. So, all right, here's our pick'em first page of graphics. You can see our current standings there. Jordan and I both went 3-2 last week. Zach went 2-3. First game up, Illinois and Kansas. Jordan went with Kansas. Zach, you also went with Kansas. I picked Illinois. I don't really have a reason other than I want Illinois to win so that when Penn State beats them next week, it's better. So why Kansas?
So I want that to happen as well. And one thing we talked about earlier this week is there's a couple Big Ten games this week that if they don't go the way of the Big Ten team, and if Iowa continues to look kind of crappy, you're talking about a year in which the Big Ten may only have 3 teams get ranked. Maybe Maryland sneaks in there, but this is a game where I think Illinois could find their way into the rankings at some point. But if they don't win this one, and then, hopefully from our perspective, lose to Penn State, they're going to struggle to get into the top 25. I like Kansas offensively. They're really good. They didn't have Jalen Daniels back last week. He was their star quarterback from last year. He was dealing with an injury. The backup played really well, but I think Daniels is supposed to play this week. I just think they have a little bit too much offense for Illinois. I think Illinois might be better offensively this year than people realize because we think it's Brett Bielema and they're just gonna, have 8 offensive linemen on the field and run the ball every play. They have some receivers. They have a quarterback transfer from Ole Miss, Luke Altmaier. I don't know if you caught the tail end of their game against Toledo. They didn't look great. Toledo's probably the best team in the MAC, but it doesn't give you a ton of confidence. But I think this is going to be a really good game. I just think Kansas has a little bit more offense.
And this is a Friday night game, right? This is on a Friday night. So all the other games are on Saturday. That's the other thing that I saw a comment last week was the order of our pick'ems, right? These are in orders of game time. So
these are
not
in order
of like relevance or whichever game we think is the most important. They are just straight game time starting East Coast times near us. So next game, I guess we don't really need to say anything because all 3 of us picked Notre Dame to win at NC State. I think this ends up being the second best game of the week. But I think Notre Dame ends up winning this one comfortably. I think they even cover.
You just told us they're going undefeated. So my expectation is anytime we throw in 2 weeks, we're going to have Notre Dame, Ohio State on this, and you better be pulling the lever for Notre Dame.
I will, but so I think they're going undefeated. When they lose one, then I'm going to say they probably don't win another one just because I do actually hate Notre Dame like quite a bit, but I didn't want to just keep picking the same 4 teams, so I think Notre Dame's going to find a way. Anyways, moving on.
I think it's going to be a good game. I do think NC State has the chance to beat them. They got a transfer quarterback in, Brennan Armstrong from Virginia. They looked okay in week 1 against UConn, but I have Notre Dame as well, obviously, as you can see on the screen. But I do think this is a good game, and I don't think they can look past NC State.
Yeah, I agree. It's a tough play. Playing there. Also on the road is going to be really tough, so should be a good one. Next, we have Nebraska at the surprise of last week, now ranked number 22 in the AP poll. These rankings are AP poll. Nebraska at 22, Colorado. Jordo went Nebraska along with Zach. I guess he just copied Zach's pick. And I went with Colorado. I'm not confident that Nebraska is very good. So, I don't know. People were really kind of talking up their game against Minnesota, and they played well against Minnesota. Don't get me wrong, but I thought Minnesota played really poorly. So I just Colorado has some crazy offensive weapons, man. I think they can outscore Nebraska is what it comes down to.
I think they definitely can too. My pick is less about Nebraska and what I think so I do think Nebraska won't make the mistake. Matt Rule will not make the mistake that Sonny Dykes made. So TCU ran for like 8,000 yards against Colorado, and Colorado just could not tackle TCU's running backs. And TCU just kept throwing the ball though. I mean, they like I was hyperbolic, but they had I think 325 rushing yards, and they didn't run it a lot. They threw it a lot, and I just think Colorado is not going to be good at the line of scrimmage on either side of the ball. Their linebackers look pretty suspect. If I'm Nebraska. And Nebraska, the one thing offensively, they did not look great. And they lost their best receiver to a torn ACL in week 1. But the quarterback can run. Jeff Sims is a really good athlete, questionable as a passer, transfer from Georgia Tech, but he can run. And so if I'm Matt Rule, we're digging out the 1983 triple option playbook, and we are just running. Keep Shedeur Sanders and all those guys on the sideline and just run. I think this has the potential to be another sort of like high scoring, last team gets the ball type shootout on big noon kickoff. But
Gus Johnson going crazy.
And I just think, and maybe I'm a hater, maybe I just want to see, Dion get humbled, but I just feel like this is the prime spot for a letdown. Where like the hype and everything it's got to be so hard in that building right now, keeping everybody on track and saying, look, just forget about last week. Just 10 minutes ago, these guys said you were the worst roster in the Power 5. And now they're saying you're going to kill Nebraska. Don't listen to them. Pay attention to what's going on in this building. It's got to be so difficult right now to keep that mindset. It's just it's like the perfect trap game.
Yeah. But also, these guys love to play for Coach Prime. So I feel like if he tells them, hey, we are this good. There's power in belief, man. So
yeah, I think this has the potential to be something somewhat unprecedented. Like we use so many cliches in the coaching world, and I just referenced the letdown game, and maybe a lot of that stuff doesn't apply when you have this really non-traditional
It's true.
style of play and style of coaching, and maybe you can just kind of throw that all out the window, and we'll see. It's gonna either way. It's gonna be interesting, and whoever had the balls to make Colorado the big noon kickoff for the first 2 weeks for Fox, like tip your cap to that guy, because there's a chance when you scheduled that months ago that Colorado still could have been horrendous, and you could have had a couple really ugly games at big noon kickoff, and it worked out for them. So credit to them.
Yeah, and I mean, I know there's a lot of people that don't, but I love the way Coach Prime is with those kids. I mean, it's to me a lot of coaching, a lot of good coaching is more about connections than about X and O's. And obviously Coach Prime knows his X and O's, don't get me wrong. But the fact that those guys want to play for him, and they however many came in from FBS or FCS and all these things, like, I don't know, it's cool to me. I appreciate it. So sure, I do kind of agree with you that like there's times where I'm like, we could humble Coach Prime a little bit, but also he thinks he's the best and he's going to go out and act like it. So there's something cool about that to me. So I don't know, but we aren't a Colorado podcast. I guess we could be maybe. Next one, 20 Ole Miss, number 20 Ole Miss at number 24 Tulane, one of two games featuring two ranked teams this week. This is a crazy one. I don't think many people would have thought that this would be whenever this game was probably put on the schedule. Which, do they play every year, Zach? I forget. They play pretty regularly, don't they? I think.
Yeah, I don't know if they play every year, but I think they do play from time to time.
Yeah, because they're pretty close. So, Jordo picked Tulane. He's all aboard the Green Wave. He has been on them for a while now, and Zach and I both picked Ole Miss. Like I said earlier, I just completely being honest, I don't really know a lot about what Tulane brought back from last year. I just love Ole Miss's helmets. I just really do. That's the only reason I pick them. I mean, I can't lie.
They maybe do have the nicest uniforms in college football. And actually, Tulane did, just to get back to your point, Tulane actually did bring a lot back, and they brought the quarterback back from last year's team, and they obviously beat USC. Again, you could probably say USC didn't care about that bowl game, but I just think Ole Miss has the superior athletes, and because of what Tulane did last year, it's very easy for Lane Kiffin to not have his guys, make sure his guys are up for this game. If Tulane wasn't Tulane last year, this is the type of game where they're going on the road to Tulane, which is kind of interesting. You're not going to let them sneak up on you after the year they had last year.
Absolutely. So that's our first 4 games. We got 4 more here on our second graphic. First one is A&M at Miami. All 3 of us went A&M. I stand by what I said earlier. I think A&M is on the verge of breaking out of being a great team, or they find a way to lose this game and they plummet and they struggle all season. Do you have anything on this one, Zach?
So I think this is a really interesting game. I think either way, we're going to get a fan base, no matter which way it goes, we're going to get a fan base that is immediately in, blow it up, take it out back and shoot it behind the shed and start over. And another fan base is going to have crazy high expectations because, hey, we beat Texas A&M, or hey, we beat Miami. And I don't think we'll know enough about either team until we get a little bit further down the line. But it's kind of like a show me game for both teams, that everybody's been snake bit by both of these programs over the years, thinking they're back, or thinking this is the year that no matter what happens, I'm still going to need to see more. But it's definitely the type of game where you win this game, you can really springboard success. Because I think Miami's going to be better than they were last year. And I think Texas A&M, even if they are kind of the mess that they were last year, that's a super talented roster. So like if you're Miami and you win that game, you got a lot to be happy about. I just think I trust Texas A&M a little bit more. They got a little bit more talent on the roster.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So that makes sense. Excuse me. Next one, obviously the game of the week. The one that everyone's going to be talking about, no matter kind of what happens. We got number 11 Texas at number 3 Bama. This was such a big game, such a great game last year. A lot of fun to watch. Just crazy moments in that game. Jordo picked the Horns, which I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised either way with Jordo, because he loves horns down, but he absolutely hates Alabama. So this was probably, I genuinely think he might have flipped a coin, because I think he hates them both so much.
This is a tough spot for him for sure.
Yeah. And we both went with Alabama. I just think Alabama's better. Like, I don't think Texas is bad, but I don't think they're elite. So I just think Bama's better.
It's a tough one because
Yeah.
so I would not be surprised if Texas wins. I don't think we know. Well, I don't think Alabama knows what it has at quarterback yet. One game against Middle Tennessee State's not going to convince me that
Right.
Jalen Milroe is just going to step in and be Bryce Young. And he doesn't need to be Bryce Young, but Texas looked really good last year against Alabama. And I think if Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt, they probably win that game. But it's also Texas, so it's so hard for me to say, yeah, you know what? Texas is going to go into Tuscaloosa, and they're gonna do something that only one team has done in the last 53 tries, which is beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. They are 52-1 in their last 53 home games, and the one was Joe Burrow.
Right.
And I don't think Quinn Ewers is Joe Burrow. So it's so hard to beat a top 5 or a top 10 team on the road. That's really what it comes. If this game was in Texas, I very well would pick Texas because I do think they can play with Bama, and I wouldn't be shocked if they win. I just don't have the confidence to call it.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked about scheduling, and I know that this is ultimately going to be an SEC game here next year and into the future, but kudos to these guys for scheduling this home and home last year and this year. And this is 2 huge programs in college football willing to schedule a home and home with each other. I love it. I love it for college football.
Yeah.
It's
great.
Great.
Just imagine what the month of September would be like if Texas and Bama and LSU and FSU and some of these other teams didn't have the balls to play each other. Like, it would just be a ridiculously boring 4 weeks until conference play starts. Like,
I agree. So I think it's gonna be a good one. Bama's just better right now. Next one we got Wisconsin at Washington State. Jordo and I went with the Badgers on the road. Heck of a road trip out there to Washington State. Zach, you took the Cougars, flying the flag on game day. I assume you'll be there this week. I don't really know. This was the true definition of a toss-up to me, where I think Wisconsin is better, very slightly. But the fact that it's in Washington State made me want to pick the Cougars. So then I just kind of kept going back and forth, and ultimately decided I wanted to go not what you picked, just because of our trying to win the championship. So
it's only week 2, and we're already
thinking about it,
strategizing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a couple things play into it. I think one, Wisconsin I was not super impressed with Wisconsin in week 1. 2, I don't know that they know who they are. I think, like I said, they came out all offseason. Why is their coach's name is eluding me? Luke Pickle was running around saying we're going to be running the air raid, and Tanner Mordecai did not look great, and he was forcing passes, and there were some interceptions, and then they settled down and they ran the ball. And I think if they figure out who they are, it's going to go a long way, and they give the quarterback the confidence of like, hey, here's your role, here's what we need from you, and he knows that. But also, I think Washington State's a very solid, competent team. They returned the quarterback Cam Ward, who nobody knows who he is because they're never on TV. Although I think this is the ABC primetime game, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
their quarterback is good, and for a Pac-12 team, I think they were ranked like 50th in total points last year, which doesn't sound great, but is like one of the better defenses in the Pac-12. So and they're at home, and it's a cross-country trip, and they actually beat Wisconsin last year in Madison. So I don't think this is the type of situation where like Wisconsin has an immensely more talented roster than Washington State. And I think Washington State has the better quarterback. So I'm going Washington State.
I think it's going to be a good one.
And I'm going to be, anytime you give me one of the Pac-2 as a pick 'em this year, Oregon State and Washington State, I'm going to, I got to support them.
Yep. I said it this week. I hope they stay the Pac-2. I hope they play each other 12 times next year. It'd be hilarious. Just do it. Why not? Be great. So last one, our last game before we get into our super dogs here, which I know some of you can already read. Auburn traveling to California to take on the Bears. Jordo went with Auburn, which is a little surprising to me, and Zach and I both went with Cal. I don't think either one of these teams is any good. So ultimately, it came down to the fact that it's in Cal, and that's why I picked Cal.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of my pick as well. I got to know Cal a little bit last week because I picked North Texas as my super dog, and Cal promptly put up 58, and I think it's like 660 yards of offense on them. And North Texas has actually been one of the better Conference USA teams the last couple of years. So that was very eye-opening for me. They ran the ball really well. I also know that Auburn is starting Robbie Ashford at quarterback, who's a guy that we saw last year.
Yeah.
And I didn't catch any of the Auburn games, so maybe he made immense jumps as a quarterback in the last 12 months. But I think Hugh Freeze is going to turn Auburn around. Whatever his past troubles might have been, I do think that was a good hire for Auburn. I just think cross-country trip on the road, I don't trust their quarterback. Cal, again, it's early. They seem to at least have an offense. So for those reasons, I went with Cal.
Yeah, makes sense to me. So I don't know. That's definitely a tough one. And like you said, people are probably going to say, why would that be one of your pick'ems? That's the point. We don't know who's going to win it. So that's why it's a good pick'em.
Yeah.
So,
two Power 5 programs. And
yeah, it's fun. Oh, sorry. Wrong slide here. Last one we're going to get into here is our super dog. Jordo went with Temple, who is 9-point underdogs playing Rutgers this weekend. I think that was one that all of us kind of had on our radar for picking our super dog. As I mentioned earlier, this week's super dog was super hard because games are either like 30-point blowout or there's a lot of like Penn State's playing an FCS school, like so there's no line on that game, and there's a bunch of them this week, or there's also like a bunch of games that are very tight spreads, like 3 to 5 points. So it made trying to pick a super dog really challenging. So my strategy for this week, because I have the lead 3-0-0 in our super dogs, I went with Western Michigan, who is on the road in upstate New York against Syracuse in the Dome. They are 23-point underdogs, or it was 23-point underdogs the last time I checked. Now, to be completely frank, I don't expect Western Michigan to actually win this game. What I'm hoping for is to get that 1 point for them to stay within 23, which I think is very, very doable against Syracuse, who lost a lot from last year. I mean, remember that hype train for a little while. They were like ranked like 8th or 9th in the nation or something like that. That was fun for a little while. And then did they win another game the rest of the year? I think they won 1 more or 2 more, something like that. But either way, yeah. I don't know. This week was hard.
Number 2, because that's like they might be down 4 touchdowns to get a touchdown late, to bring it down to 21 or something. And
yeah. So that's kind of what I'm banking on, was trying to get 1 point, because also the way we're picking, I had last pick this week. So I probably would have went with the one that Zach's about to talk about, but he took that one. So I went with Western Michigan. So Zach, let's see. Why did you pick Vanderbilt?
Yeah. So Vandy is getting 10 points in a road trip to Wake Forest. Wake Forest did not look very good. They played, I think it was Thursday or maybe Friday night. They played a home game against Elon, not the owner of SpaceX and X. They didn't look great. And oddly, Vanderbilt, so they played a week 0 game. They beat Hawaii, and then I forget who they beat last week. They already have 2 games under their belt. I don't expect them to do much in the SEC, but it does appear like they at least have the ability to score some points against bad defenses. So 10 points seems like a lot for a unproven Wake Forest team who, frankly, Wake Forest without Sam Hartman, I don't know that we know or they know what they are. I mean, Sam Hartman, I think he was a starter for 4 years. So they may be facing an identity crisis. And so that seemed to me 10 points. Like, I think they can keep that within a touchdown or so. Frankly, I wouldn't be shocked if they actually outright win, because I don't know what we have with Wake.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said, that was probably if that one was on the table whenever I was picking, that was probably the one I was going to go with as well, because I agree. What is Wake Forest now that they don't have Sam Hartman? When he got injured and missed a game, I think he missed 2 games last year. They did not look good. So I just don't know. So I think that's a really good pick. I think Jordan's pick's really good too. Rutgers looked really solid against Northwestern, but Northwestern is also absolutely terrible. And they were going to be terrible before all of this stuff broke that happened and everyone got fired. And so, yeah, Rutgers looked good, and kudos to them. But you're getting 9 points for Temple. So I feel like that's a good pick too. So we'll see. So, well, this turned out a lot longer than I think either one of us planned, but we did have like 2.5 rants on here, which was fun. And we ended up talking.
Is that a new podcast name?
2.5 Rants. Oh, that is. I did not plan that, but that is. I would listen to that podcast. But also we were able to put up comments, which was fun. So,
yeah, really appreciate the folks that are following along and chiming in, because we just love. I feel like every week we do this where we get to the end, we're like, man, that went a lot longer than we anticipated, but clearly we love talking college football, and I think getting the questions and the comments from folks is just awesome, because there's people out there that obviously don't mind listening to us and don't mind chiming in with their thoughts, and just love it. College football. We're about to get into the heart of the college football season, and there's nothing better in sports, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can see it on your end, Zach, because I'm on like the sharing side. We're consistently at like 8 to 12 viewers pretty much all night. We've been around there. I know it's now that we're almost 10 o'clock and a little longer on the cast, we're down to only a handful. But the fact that there's 8 to 12 people in this world that wanted to listen to us talk about Penn State beating Delaware, and I mean, it's awesome. So we appreciate Nittany No Huddle Nation. Keep following along. We got some cool stuff all season planned. I will say, and I know Zach and I have talked about this, Jordan won't be back for Saturday, probably. I would be surprised if we have an instant reaction, especially right after the game. Zach has already committed that he may or may not watch the game because he hates Peacock and he's a boomer. I will be at the game, so the fact is that I just won't have enough service probably to stream from my car while I sit in parking lot 32. If you see me this weekend, come say hi. That'd be awesome. I'd love to talk to you. And Jordan,
we got world-renowned scientists and engineers at Penn State University, and we can't figure out how to get service at Beaver Stadium.
Yeah, I don't know. It is what it is. So either way, I would be surprised if you see anything on Saturday. Maybe Saturday night, maybe Zach and I will hop on if we're not doing anything while other games are going on, just to give a quick recap. Either way, we always say it's going to be short and it turns into 90 minutes, but maybe it'll be a short one on Saturday. So appreciate Nittany No Huddle Nation. Appreciate all of you. And until next time.
Thanks for watching the Nittany No Huddle podcast.
Check us out on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
Podcasts are posted weekly on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss one of our new shows.